Greetings, my name is Tuomas Parviainen, and in this video I'm going to share with you my realizations about the mind. Some years ago I was facing a lot of struggles, mental and physical. I had nerve issues in my hands that prevented me from using them for most tasks, including things like writing on a keyboard. I had pain in my back that forced me to lie in bed for most of the day. And partly from these issues and some past things, I was extremely depressed and anxious. I had lost the ability to do almost anything that I had enjoyed previously. I even experienced occasional derealization, which is a feeling of the world not being real, like it's a dream. Surviving all of this seemed overwhelmingly difficult, and I saw only one way out of it: figuring out how the mind works. I had a lot of questions. What makes a human being happy? What causes a person to have the thoughts they have? What makes a person do anything? What makes life, or anything else, feel meaningful? These are obviously considered to be difficult questions, and they seemed that way to me as well. But before all this happened to me, in my work I had a simple principle. When you're struggling to find an answer, consider changing the question, because asking the right question can be the most important part. When you try to find an answer, you try to find something that will make sense to you. So, I found this to be the most important question. What causes anything to make sense to you? If you don't know that, then how can you trust what does or doesn't make sense to you? Then I started finding answers. I found a way to cure myself. At this point in time, the issues I listed are behind me, but I didn't just go back to how I used to be. Instead, I gained a lot more. I reached my goal of understanding how the mind works. Now I'm here to present to you that understanding. To some of you, parts of this will sound disturbing. We like to hear things that affirm what we already believe, and some of you believe things that will run counter to what I'm going to say here. Making the mental journey from one belief system to another has a period of turbulence in between, and people don't want to go through such periods of uncertainty. But for those of you who will make that leap, let me assure you, I've never had less concerns, and the same can become true for you. Though exceptions may apply if, let's say, your community depends upon your belief system. For some people, this will fit in with what you already believe. This will provide answers to some questions that you haven't been able to figure out. It will show that some of the questions you have been asking have been the wrong ones to ask, and this will provide some answers to questions that you haven't thought to ask. This is a theory of the mechanical mind. The starting point is that there is no free will. The universe is deterministic. We can see that other physical matter that doesn't make up our minds follows rigid physical laws, and we can predict how that matter will behave. So I saw no reason why the same wouldn't apply to the matter that does make up our minds. There is argument on whether or not there is some sort of randomness, perhaps from the quantum level. But regardless of that, even if there was, there isn't enough of it to prevent us from making complex mathematical predictions accurately, and we also don't have conscious control over that randomness anyway. However, if you do believe that there is free will, then I'll put forward for you that you do not need free will to explain how your mind works. You don't need the concept of free will to explain why you have the experience of making decisions, of choosing certain actions, of thinking in a way that you feel is yours. So why do people believe in free will? For one, it makes it a lot easier to understand your own experience. It makes it easier to have certain morality systems wherein the justification for punishment and reward depends on the idea of free will. The concept of free will is also central to systems that give people a sense of meaning. Some people feel that their lives have meaning because they get to affect the world in a way that they choose out of their own free will. And most obviously, there is religion, like Christianity, where the concept of free will is extremely important. If free will is extremely central to your belief system, then jumping into this system might feel difficult at first. So, if no free will, then what? How should you think of yourself if not as this entity that makes decisions? Here's how it is. You are an expression of the same universal force that moves everything. The laws of physics describe our understanding what that universal force is. You are this force expressed in the form of a human. As the energy and matter that make up your mind act according to the universal force, they produce your actions, your thoughts, and your feelings. So far, this is not necessarily anything new. Some people already think this way. This is only the foundation for the theory. But this is the way you should seek to understand yourself. This is the first part in removing the idea of a controller. But I want to be clear. This idea of a universal force isn't meant to be anything extra or supernatural. It is simple to say that whatever it is that moves all the other matter in the universe is the same force that moves you. So how to settle this idea with our experience of having control, of making decisions? Consider this thought experiment. Imagine that the water in this bottle would be like your mind. As the water flows from one end to the other, the water itself would keep thinking it wants to make the decision to flow there. From the point of view of the water simply feels like it's the right thing to do. It just feels right. Now, we would say that the water flows there because of external factors, like the bottle being tilted and gravity exerting its influence. But it's actually not just the external factors. It's also about the nature of the water. Not all substances would flow like this water does. If the water was lighter than the air in this bottle, then the water wouldn't flow downwards, it would flow up. In a similar way, you have external factors exerting their influence on you, and then you react to those influences according to your nature. Some people make the mistake of thinking that it's only about the external influences, but in reality, your own nature is an important part of that equation. So, you encounter influences, then you process those influences according to your nature, and you go where you go. The water seeks balance, and it goes where it goes. Our brains are a lot more complicated than just water, so our thoughts are more complicated, but it's still the same principle. All done in the way that the universal force dictates for the specific form of matter and energy. And that universal force is again what you should consider yourself to be at the deepest level. So, you are this universal force in a human form. Then comes the next question. What is the human form? This is the next level. My thinking firstly draws from the theory of evolution. You have your instincts because the process of evolution has favored the genes that are responsible for those instincts. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. There are other sources that can explain genetic evolution, and the basic idea is well known to most people. In short, you can expect that your behavior will to some degree correlate with behaviors that have previously allowed an organism to pass on their genes. This is a helpful guide in understanding your behavior. That is also nothing new, but I want to make one distinction. Evolution hasn't created every thought pattern you have. Instead, evolution has created the process that then produces thoughts, and in the past, that process has worked to create more useful thoughts than not. Some people think that they produce dysfunctional thoughts because as humans they're too self-aware, that it's our consciousness getting in the way of these simple biological processes that try to get us to pass on our genes. But that is not the case. there is a way to understand these things without such concepts. It is actually that the process we have of creating thoughts has no guarantee of only producing functional thoughts. I will explain that in more detail soon. Then there's the level that you experience, your personality. This will determine what you do in the most specific way. So why do you do what you do? Here is my answer. You always do what makes you happiest in the moment. I will explain what I mean by that exactly. Some people might think that they don't always do what makes them happiest in the moment, and they might say something like they sometimes have to do what's responsible instead of what's fun. Now, this is why I say you do what makes you happiest instead of what makes you happy. In some situations, the happiest choice will be a choice that doesn't feel as good immediately, but it will still be the happiest choice because doing it avoids the negative feelings you would get from avoiding some responsibility of yours, real or imagined. Let's say you were doing something that you liked, and suddenly you would realize that you're in danger. Let's say there was a fire alarm. Now, if you chose to ignore the fire alarm, you would likely start developing anxiety about the possible damage a fire could do. And in order to avoid that anxiety, you would do the responsible action instead and do something to protect yourself. The same principle applies in situations where the danger isn't as grave or immediate, like taking care of chores, where you would have to worry about the consequences of not doing them. So, you always do what makes you happiest in the moment. I'll also briefly address the idea that our consciousness would be motivating some of our thoughts. People will wonder about something like, what is our place in the universe, and attribute that question to the existence of consciousness, that otherwise we wouldn't concern ourselves with that. However, that is actually simply a concern of the mental engine that you are. When you ask a question like that, you're looking for an answer that will feel emotionally satisfying. A satisfying answer could be something like, you are here to help others, or you're here to experience the universe. If you think you're here to help others, it's because that feels good to you, or you're here to experience the universe because having different experiences feels interesting to you. Both of these are based on how you feel, and both of them inform what actions you should take. There are concerns about how you should orient yourself, and once you're oriented, you feel satisfied. So, what exactly makes you happy? There are two parts to this. One part is the incoming feedback. You do something that produces a pleasant emotional experience. For example, you eat something that tastes good, or you hear a joke that makes you laugh. The other part is the baseline feeling you have. That's what I will be focusing on here. The central idea in this theory is the concept of modes of your mind. Instead of you being some central controller of your mind, you are instead a collection of these modes. A mode can be anything that you do. They're like executable programs for computers. If you walk, then the mode of walking is active. If you talk, then the mode of talking is active. Your beliefs are modes as well. You have thousands of different modes, and at any time you will have multiple of them active. Each mode has a baseline feeling associated with it, which you will feel when the mode is active. So when you engage in an activity that you like, you feel good. The baseline feeling a mode has comes from two sources: the emotional experiences you have had while the mode was active, and the emotional associations transferred from other modes. The transfer process is why you can feel good just about preparing for something you like doing. Like, let's say you have a hobby you like. Then preparing for the hobby will feel good because the hobby mode transfers some of the associations into the preparation mode. Where do the modes come from? You have what I call hard triggers that cause you to feel something. The hard triggers exist in you inherently. They're genetic. These are things like food tasting good or a smile looking pleasant for you. On the negative side, you have pain or angry voices feeling bad for you. These can be overridden though by having other triggers activate at the same time, which is why some person might say they enjoy pain, but let's put that aside for now. When you have an emotional experience, that then gets recorded in your memory, and your mind connects these experiences into modes. The modes become like reservoirs for these experiences, and they can act as soft triggers. These are triggers that didn't exist in you inherently, but were created through your experiences. Getting money is a common soft trigger because while money in itself won't do anything for you, it can allow you to reach positive hard triggers or keep you away from negative hard triggers. Anything that acts as a soft trigger will eventually run out of its reservoir if it doesn't get replenished by the person having experiences from hard triggers. This is one reason why a person can have something that they enjoy that they eventually lose interest in. And it's a mechanism behind exposure therapy, where a person keeps activating some negative soft trigger and eventually it wears out because no connection to a hard trigger ever comes. Sometimes it can be that a soft trigger keeps activating a network of other modes, meaning that it is connected to more reservoirs, so it takes a while for those to run out. But if any of the modes in that network has a connection to a hard trigger, then it can sustain the system, assuming that the positive experiences will be plentiful enough. This system of developing soft triggers is what allows our intelligence. We don't have to be motivated directly by just food and physical affection in order to do something. To make this a little more clear, imagine back to when you were a baby. You would try out random things and some of them would feel good to you. Your brain will notice that when you do certain things, you reliably get good feelings from those actions. The connection gets made. For example, as a baby, you will make some sounds and the people around, most likely your parents or other caregivers, will react positively towards you in their expressions and their voices. You make an emotional impact on others. This feels pleasant, so the mode of talking gets started. Then, when you make some specific noises, those noises get better reactions, so those noises become preferred. You learn how to say words. Then you keep growing and you learn how to put those words into sentences that give you even better reactions. That is the mode of talking developing more specific sub-modes. You start to understand that there are some systems behind what makes some sentences more useful in getting people to react. You learn some system of morality so that you can say something is fair or unfair. This is dependent on what people around you will react to. You become aware of what the people around you expect from you, because when you fulfill their expectations, they again react positively towards you, or at least it prevents negative reactions, which keeps reinforcing those modes in you. You learn how to react and what to be reactive about. You learn what kinds of things you should say back in response to other things, based on what has given you the best responses, and that becomes automatic for you. Saying and doing the same things become preferred in themselves for you because of their associations. This is how your personality develops. Your personality is essentially a record of what has made you feel good or bad, and your genes as well, of course. The collection of your modes, your human form, you. The modes record their associations mainly from what happens while the mode is active, meaning when you do some action, you tend to associate new feedback with that action. Your brain is somewhat capable of moving the feedback around, even to modes that weren't active at the time, if you believe that the feedback was caused by the mode in the past. Like if you upset someone, and then later on they take some revenge, you're able to see that this is occurring because of that past action. But the active modes are preferred. This will show itself, for example, if you're doing something and then suddenly there's a big traumatic event that is unrelated to your actions. You will then have that event as an association for the mode of that action, even though it's not a useful association, because there's no actual relation. A useful association is when you can expect a similar thing to occur again if you repeat the action. The capability a person has for moving the feedback around in their mind will vary from person to person. The stronger your beliefs about the causes and effects are, the easier it will be to move the feedback around, since some modes will then attract similar feedback into them or reject dissimilar feedback, unless the amount of that feedback is overwhelming. Most of the associations in your modes will come from your social experiences. It is hard-coded in us to be affected by other people. It allows our minds to function as they do. When you impact another person emotionally, that also impacts you emotionally. We want to impact others emotionally, and throughout our lives, we basically gather strategies for impacting others, since that is going to be the majority of emotional associations that get recorded in our modes. Our minds are essentially programmed through socializing. This also ends up being the fuel that our brains need. Unused modes get discarded, so our modes have a constant need for new feedback. This is why people can feel lonely. The structure of your mind will start to wither without feedback from others. People with traumas will also start to experience negative emotions from being lonely because their modes will start to transfer associations from one another in order to become more uniform. The modes will blend, which is a normal process, and like I mentioned, is necessary for enjoying the preparation for anything you do enjoy. When a person has modes with a lot of negative associations, usually called trauma, those associations will start to get transferred into other modes, destroying the positive associations they have. These people will try to avoid this, for example, by keeping their minds occupied with new feedback, since processing that takes precedence. When you get a new emotional experience, your mind has to allocate that experience into one of your modes. Basically, you try to figure out what caused you to have that emotional experience, be it negative or positive. Some experiences get allocated immediately because your existing belief about them is so strong. But mind you, this can happen even when the cause isn't a true one. An example could be like someone who is very superstitious who then assigns blame or praise for the events in their lives to some supposedly magical cause. Sometimes a person doesn't know why they feel a certain way. In these situations, they might easily allocate the feeling into the wrong mode or even leave it unallocated. Usually that happens with a negative emotion instead of a positive one. Most often I've seen this happen with social reasons, because there's lots of people who believe they shouldn't care about social reasons. Some people live in situations where they will be judged if they show that they care, which then prevents them from allocating the feeling correctly. Usually it's left as what I call free-floating anxiety. This free-floating anxiety will then allocate itself into random fears and worries. Some of you will recognize yourselves in that description. So if you wondered, why do you have these sudden, seemingly irrational fears come up, then this is usually the cause. This won't cover every possible case of that, but it's a common one. So, you always do what makes you happiest. Considering the modes and their baselines, that means that you always want to have the modes active that make you feel the best. This also applies to your beliefs, since they are modes as well. You always want to have the beliefs active that allow you to have the highest number of positive associations active while keeping the modes with negative associations inactive. Now, much like someone could claim that they don't always do what makes them the happiest, They could also claim that they don't believe what makes them happiest. The same principle as before applies here. A person might believe something very negative, like for example, they could believe everything is hopeless and they might agonize over this belief. But the person could have had moments before where that belief actually comforted them. Believing that everything is hopeless might have been a way to avoid worries, because then you can stop trying. But that comfort will be recorded as a positive association in the mode, making it a preferred option for your mind. This same principle will apply to every single mode you have. So, you always believe what makes you happiest in that moment. And for some people, happiest won't mean happy. Your values can potentially be your most important modes. They are like your meta modes. When you take stock of all the modes that you have and try to find connections, your values will be what come out of it. Because of this, your values can be your strongest modes. That meaning that they will have the largest amount of positive associations, which will mean that you will at all times want to act in accordance with your values, since this will guarantee the best possible baseline feeling you can have. This is only potentially though. Some people will have other modes that are stronger. They will have weak values because all of their emotional experiences don't really have much connecting them. Roughly speaking, your values will appear as the clearest path to happiness that your environment has offered for you. And so, if the environment hasn't offered a clear path, then you won't have clear values either. So if you want to be happy, your main interest should be in cultivating your modes. Cultivate the baselines. The problem a lot of people find themselves in is that they only look at what they currently feel, what they currently want, what their current modes are. And it might be that none of those modes will allow consistent happiness. Some people think that happiness is always temporary, that all feelings are just passing moments, they appear and they're gone. This is not the case. While the in the moment low or high might pass, it will leave a mark on your modes. It will influence your baselines and therefore your actions as well. In some cases, even for the rest of your life. You have to take your emotional experiences seriously. They are the building blocks of your mind. You are your past. However, this doesn't have to mean that you will always be defined by whatever single event has happened to you, good or bad. Every moment gives you a new addition to your past, a new addition to who you are, and it can shift the ratio of associations in a mode. Therefore, you can overcome negative events and you should make sure to not lose the good parts that you have. Some people believe, explicitly or implicitly, that our brains automatically calculate our understanding of reality. In truth, your perception of reality is dependent on a network of modes. Reality is too complex for us to simply look at it and understand the cause and effect relationships at play. Many of those relationships will take hours, days, months, or years to come true. In between the cause and the eventual effect, there can be millions upon millions of other events to focus on that we could mistake as the cause or the effect instead. So instead of looking at the world, we'll look at other people. Our brains calibrate themselves to reality through other people. Obviously, when you're growing up, you will get many of your ideas of the world through what others will teach you. But needing others for your understanding of reality never goes away. If someone validates our understanding of a cause and effect relationship, then we feel more certain of it. This can make some sense, because if another person has the same understanding, then at least it increases the chance of it being right, although obviously it's not a guarantee. You might not need every belief validated, but you need to fill up those reservoirs at some point. Otherwise, you will start to experience uncertainty and other negative feelings. Also, if you have some belief about the world and you take action based on that belief and you get a favorable result, then this increases your faith in that belief, since that is a positive association with the mode. The result can come from other reasons though, or even be random, and still make the person more certain of their belief. This is an unavoidable downside since there is no other way to become certain anyway. Often people want to tell of some event to other people because it will make something more real for our minds when others react to it. When you are trying to understand the world, keep in mind that you are really just trying to understand your own beliefs, your own modes. You do not have a direct contact with the outside reality. You are only in contact with the structure that your mind has created of the outside reality. I call this the reality structure. When you look at the world, your mind is automatically attaching different narratives to what you see. You only understand the world through these narratives. If you didn't understand how something got there, or what it could become, the possible future or the possible past of the entity, then you don't understand what it is. The collection of these narratives is the reality structure. So, when someone, for example, wonders, is there meaning in the world, they're really asking themselves, is there meaning in their reality structure? And the sensation of meaning is really just a high enough number of positive associations to keep the engine, that is your mind, running. You are really just asking yourself, do you feel motivated? Your relationships will affect how you see the world. A person who has chaotic and unreliable relationships will see the world as chaotic and unreliable. They won't just see the people as reliable, they will feel that the universe in itself is unreliable. A person with stable relationships will have more trust in the universe as a whole as well. This is again because when the person is trying to assess the universe, they are only assessing their own reality structure, which is primarily built from the person's social experiences. Consider this when you look at another person. You are both experiencing the same sliver of time, seeing and hearing pretty much the same things, but you can believe there to be different pasts and different futures for those things. And in that sense, you're not experiencing the same reality. In essence, your beliefs will be formed through an evolutionary process of what beliefs will maximize the positive emotional experiences you can attain from the world, moment by moment. The moment by moment part is key. Your brain doesn't have some inherent understanding of how things will turn out. You just try out beliefs, and if it's better than before, then you go with that. If it's worse, then you avoid it. The problem here is that people can end up in dead-end beliefs, where the belief will lead the person to only a small amount of positive experiences, so the person wants to pursue the belief. They don't want to retreat from it, because that would make them feel worse in the moment, even though if the person retreated far enough and then tried a different path, they would then find significantly more benefit. Our brains don't inherently know where these better paths will lie. A person could also retreat from a belief that was the right way all along because they encountered some initial resistance. And then there's situations where beliefs will only bring benefit when combined together, making a person never consider the combination because they don't see the benefit in the individual beliefs. A person could be in a situation where there could be every reason to believe that they will feel extremely good if they just do one thing. But if they don't feel better immediately by activating the mode related to that action, then they will never do it. Some people might think that this is silly. I would say it's silly to expect otherwise, because it could only go otherwise if there was a controller. Like I've said, as a human being, your only goal is to activate the modes that feel the best moment by moment. Will that series of mode activations also correlate with you having a happy or successful life? Not necessarily. Hence many of the problems people face. Hence much of what we call irrational behavior. This is a very important thing to understand about yourself and others. If you want to make sure that you will do something, then you have to make sure that the mode of that action feels better than other available modes. The most important narratives for your life are the ones that get attached to people. What do you believe is human nature? Some people believe that humans by nature just want power for themselves, that humans are primarily selfish, and they might use evolution as a reason for it. They might say things like, those who were concerned with their own interests passed on their genes more. Others might say that humans are primarily kind, and those who aren't kind simply have had dysfunctional relationships that have impaired their supposedly true nature. Neither of these narratives is true. As you can see from my theory, humans are primarily neutral, and we learn to be either selfish or kind or anything else because of what our relationships support for us to be. There will be some genetic variance, yes, like in how different things get weighted inside the mind. Like some people will be more responsive to negative feedback than others, or more responsive to positive affirmations from others, although most of that responsiveness, or the lack of it, will be related to what you have experienced before. Genes do play a role, but even something very basic, like walking upright, is a learned behavior. Feral human children have been known to walk on all fours since they didn't have other humans teaching them. But why is it then that some people think that deep down everyone is selfish or selfless? The easy answer would be that people have had social experiences that have made them think those. But it's more nuanced than that. It's about what you are reactive to. What do you value? What you value is something that you want to be reactive to, but you also have things that you are reactive to, but you don't want to be. Here I will be talking about both willing reactivity and unwilling reactivity. There are people who value other people's feelings, which means they are reactive to those feelings. If you are reactive to those feelings, then you want to have an internal reason for it as well. And since everyone has feelings, it would necessitate that you see every person having something valuable in them. If you believe everyone to be good deep down, then that would give an explanation for being reactive to everyone. However, in reality, these kinds of beliefs most often develop when a person has been in a harmful situation, like growing up in a family where people's emotions would be volatile and there wouldn't be clear values to follow. The only value that could develop is just not upsetting others, regardless of the reason behind it. So, a person grows up in an emotionally volatile household, they develop the mode of being reactive to the feelings of others, even when it wouldn't be fair or sensible, and then they go out into the world with this mode in them. They will feel that everyone has something worth reacting to, which in their mind translates into everyone being kind deep down. Your beliefs are simply a description of your reality structure. Then there's the other side. A person who believes everyone is inherently selfish. A person can have a reason behind that, and they most likely have had experiences with selfish people. But in a similar way, that can be about what the person is reactive to. The person might want to cut off as much reactivity as possible to a small group of people around them, and what can help with that is not having any consideration that those people could have something worth reacting to. So the person feels good about believing everyone is inherently selfish. The same kind of thing can happen with subgroups of people, like a person doesn't want to react to one person who is part of a specific gender or racial group, for example, and so they reduce their reactivity to the entire group by believing those people don't have valuable qualities. When a person does have some reactivity towards something, but they don't want to have it, then they will feel anger as a protection. This doesn't mean anger is necessarily a bad thing, because sometimes you do need to protect yourself from harmful influences, but it does mean the existence of anger speaks of a situation that is undesirable. Usually what is considered trauma is a person having reactivity towards things that aren't beneficial for them, and hence the person might have a lot of anger as well. What others expect from you defines the relationships of most people. When you do something that someone expects of you, that right away affects that person emotionally, and therefore it affects you. Caring about expectations emerges therefore as a very important mode, and a lot of socializing revolves around managing those modes. People want to manage what is expected of them. You have an incentive to make sure that you will only be reactive to the right things. You can imagine social situations as these tracks of expectations that people will offer you, and you will want to make sure that you will only get on the tracks that are good for you. Remember that there is no controller. You only get on those tracks or avoid them based on your existing modes. You can also put forward your own expectations, which can include expectations about the expectations of others. Even if you don't consciously care about the expectations, they will very likely still affect you. Maybe one day you get exposed to some expectation enough times that it becomes a mode your mind tries to activate. And even if you don't follow it, your other modes will need to resist it, producing an unpleasant feeling for you. When someone says that they don't care about social aspects like this, it can be the same as someone saying that they don't care about shelter. It can be true, they might not think about it. Maybe the person lives in a place where they don't need shelter to survive. But if a storm comes, then that person will be affected by it, whether they wanted to care or not. One of the most important things that your social relationships will offer are the expectations that your mind can then follow safely. They can come from your family, friends, co-workers, or whoever. Most people live in situations where they have to help others out. You can't simply say that you will only do what is in your immediate self-interest. And if you do decide to do that, then you most likely won't have successful social relationships, among other problems. It is ideal to live in a community where people will care about helping others. That being said, some people have grown up in families where their well-being wasn't cared about, so they haven't had an incentive to create the mode of caring about the expectations. Those people aside, most people have to figure out when and how exactly should they help others and when not to. If you help everyone on anything, then you most likely run into trouble. All it would take is one person who would take advantage of that. So, the extremes aren't viable, which is why we go with the expectations we're used to. And those expectations will shield you from the expectations you want to avoid following. This is crucial for the lives of most people. This is also the kind of thing that can cause a lot of clashing between people who consciously care about expectations and people who don't. Like, someone could complain to another person about what someone expected of them, and the other person listening sees no issue. They think, just say no, easy and simple. That person assumes there is a controller, and usually they assume that we inherently just do everything for our own benefit. There are a lot of misunderstandings around this area. In reality, our minds have no inherent concept of working for your own benefit or for the benefit of others. Like I say, it's really just putting together emotional experiences into modes and then executing those modes. There are a lot of nuances to take into account on this topic. Like, someone could feel the expectations they face are problematic simply because their life hasn't offered them better expectations to follow. So even little things affect them a lot. Like I've said, some people don't actively focus on the expectations. A person might focus on imposing their will on others or getting a reaction out of others by any means, if that happens to be how their modes have come to be. What matters is how they've gotten emotional reactions out of others and how they've avoided bad experiences. This is a topic I will explain more extensively at another time. Since this theory is based in determinism, I should address how some people think that determinism means that you should never regret anything, since everything was unavoidable anyway. It's true that when you look at the past, you can see what was unavoidable. You did your best actions with the best knowledge that you had. It couldn't have gone differently, which is helpful in not agonizing over how some things have happened. However, regret can serve a purpose even while believing in determinism. You regret something when there's a negative association attached to a mode that you still use. Ideally, a regret is telling you that there's a chance you might repeat some wrong action in the future and you need to address that. In order to be free of the regret, the negative association needs to be allocated into another mode that you can avoid using. This is why people will say things like, "It wasn't your fault," or "You couldn't have done anything," to a person who is regretful, because it's meant to prevent allocating the negative experience into the modes related to the actions of the person, which is sometimes the right thing to say, but at other times it's better to try to identify what could be done differently. Let's say a person is trying to have a romantic relationship that then goes badly, and they are told that they couldn't have done anything to prevent that. It will mean that they will allocate the negative experience into the mode of dating as a whole, when they could instead allocate it into a sub-mode of, for example, dating a specific kind of person, and they wouldn't have to feel bad about dating as a whole. Then they would just avoid dating people of a specific kind. The mistake has been identified, so no need to regret. Another thing I'll briefly address are attachments, since there are existing philosophies in the world that say you should be rid of attachments, that doing so will make you happy. There's some truth but mostly falsehood in that. An attachment is a mode where you will feel bad when the attachment hasn't been met, motivating you to fulfill the attachment. An attachment can be like a warning signal. For example, you can have the attachment to having food in your home, and that attachment will have a similar function as a low fuel signal in a car. When you notice that you don't have food, you will become concerned over it, and you will form a plan to address that concern. If you removed that attachment, you would feel better for some time until you got hungry and had to face the reality of not having food. Then, when you were feeling bad about that, you would need to allocate those negative feelings into something, the most likely target for allocation being a belief that would go something like, "You didn't make sure that you will have food in your home," creating the attachment again. So ideally, an attachment protects you from getting yourself into bad situations. So, removing an attachment can make you happier, much like turning off the fire alarm can make you feel more at peace until you start feeling the heat. But you can also have a faulty fire alarm, much like you can have a faulty emotional attachment that you should get rid of. The food situation is a pretty obvious one. It gets more complicated with the attachments that people can have about social situations. For example, problems might come if a person gets into a bad situation when they trusted someone when they shouldn't have. And this leads to them allocating the negative feeling from that into the attachment of not trusting anyone, which will be too general because it will block out a lot of positive situations as well. However, a person might not know any other mode to focus on, or their situation might not allow other considerations, so that's how they will allocate the feelings. This is a deep topic. I won't go into all of the nuances right now, but I plan to speak about this more at another time. Another topic I'll cover briefly is morality. A lot of morality systems are attached to the concept of free will, so a concern someone could have is how can you make moral judgments without that concept? In the future I will cover the topic of morality within the theory of the mechanical mind more extensively, but I will say a few things about it now, so that if you're going to adopt this theory as your operating system, you can have an idea of the morality foundation. Morality is simply a system of rules. Most often the goal of a specific morality system is to allow a society to flourish by having all the people in that society follow that morality. There are also religious systems where people might say the goal is to please God or something to that effect. But in reality, most of the morality there as well ends up being about the well-being of society, with a few rules that are more magical in their reasoning. So, what is the alleged problem of morality without free will? Some people think that nothing could be described as brave or noble or evil or anything else because people don't have a choice in how they act. This is based on the free will paradigm, where things have meaning because of choice. Then if you say there is no choice at all, then it does mean all the meaning is gone as well. Some people end up believing there is no controller, but there is instead some sort of soul or consciousness that is separate from your body, and it's that soul or consciousness that would be getting the undeserved praise or criticism. Quite useless then, when seen from that point of view. However, in reality, you are your mental engine, the collection of modes. It's the engine that gets the praise or the criticism. That praise or criticism will affect how the engine, yours or someone else's, acts in the future, and that is the purpose of the feedback. You attach more positive feedback to a mode, it gets activated more often and more strongly, or vice versa with negative feedback. It's not just about making the person feel some way in the moment, it's that that feeling will be recorded in their modes. So you can describe someone as being brave if they have brave modes, or describe them as evil if they have evil modes, as long as you don't believe that those qualities are inherent to them. You should aim to see the world as simply desirable or undesirable states, including how you see people's minds. One thing that some people say is that you should never be angry at people because, as determinism goes, they never had a choice, that you should just forgive. But as I've said before, anger is about resisting the influence of someone. One reason why we hate people who do wrong while not hating natural disasters in the same way is because our brains aren't calibrated according to natural disasters, but we are socially programmed by other humans, which is the dimension that isn't often recognized when discussing justice. And you shouldn't forgive someone by default, because it can mean accepting the way that person has affected you. Justice and forgiveness are complicated topics. I could say a lot more, but like many things here, it will have to be for another time. Finally, I would like to tell you how this theory can be applied, with a focus on helping others emotionally, like in psychotherapy or just in everyday life. The problems people face are related to what modes of theirs have the highest ratio of positive associations. In order to create change, you have to affect the modes of the person. It can be adding positive associations to preferable modes, or adding negative associations to not so preferable modes. A common mistake that people do when encountering a person who struggles with negative thoughts, for example, is that they talk to the person as if there's a controller. They might say something like, "Do you really want to think in such a negative way?" which is completely useless. The person has no direct control over how they think. This kind of talk only makes the person feel that they're somehow defective just for being aware of the content of their mind. The appropriate action would be to discuss the reasons behind the thinking and add new associations there. While there is no direct control, you can seek out experiences that can change your thinking over a period of time. Another common problem is validating the person too broadly. People often seem to think that our minds would have this single reservoir for affection, presumably the same reservoir that the controller entity would then use. The problem is that the person might have very negative modes active while they're being validated. Those people should not be told that there's nothing wrong with them. It's too broad. Then you're just adding positive associations into their self-defeating modes and ensuring that their problems will not go away. Like for example, they might think very badly of themselves when that won't be useful. Then that person shouldn't be told that there's nothing wrong with them. Clearly there is. That thought is the problem. Ideally, in a therapy situation, the person with the problem essentially explains their reality structure to a person who has a healthier reality structure, so that that person can then say what matches or doesn't match their reality. Then you can discuss the reasons behind the beliefs and when there are discrepancies. So, for example, someone has grown up in a dysfunctional family and they've developed false ideas about what should be considered normal human behavior. Then the person with the more accurate ideas can give corrective feedback. Now, some people would say that they already know the accurate ideas. Their feelings just don't match. In cases like that, the problem is usually that the person isn't expressing their actual feelings, their actual engine. They've just learned what they are supposed to have as the correct thoughts, although even then most of those thoughts aren't correct at all. They're just seen as correct in the free will paradigm, for example. A person like that needs to activate their harmful modes. That is to say, they need to express their actual negative feelings, and only then can a corrective feedback be given so that it can attach to those modes. A common obstacle there, though, can be that the person will at the same time think something like, nobody will really care, and unless that is addressed, it's that belief that ends up getting reinforced when the therapist offers support. The person just won't believe. Another problem that people can have is that they feel very low about themselves, and then, if they tell someone how they really feel, that other person then reacts to the content of it emotionally. As the theory explains, when you impact someone emotionally with a mode, it reinforces the mode. That is simply how it works. This is one reason why some people hate being pitied. It will cause the belief to stick. A lot of people are stuck in their emotional situations simply because there has been no understanding of those situations. Like a person who is depressed because they haven't gotten validation from people, and then they're forced to put aside those feelings, pretend like the feelings aren't there, which ensures that the person won't get validated for who they really are. So they keep being depressed because their central modes don't get any positive experiences to fuel them. Now, I understand why it's difficult for people to handle others who suffer from emotional problems. You haven't had the understanding, and you most likely won't have the right boundaries and attachments to deal with the chaos the other person experiences. There is even a term, secondary traumatization, which describes how someone can get affected just by hearing about the bad experiences and bad feelings of another person. There's a few reasons why that can happen. You could listen to a person talk about how everything seems meaningless and it affects your worldview. You partially start to see things as meaningless as well. You might be really attached to making sure others don't feel bad, and hearing about the bad feelings of someone causes the attachment to become unfulfilled. If you can't fix those feelings, so you'll feel bad from that. It might also be that the person you're trying to help has negative feelings towards all people, so that includes you. So you're being subjected to the aggression that person projects upon you, even if they don't directly verbalize it. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong, even some other things that I didn't mention here. So how could this theory help with that? As I've mentioned, we mainly change through impacting other people emotionally. So in helping someone emotionally, you would need to be open to being influenced by that person, which is what will expose you to the risks like the ones I just described. If you were completely closed and dismissive of the person, then you could shield yourself from harm, but it would prevent being helpful. You also need to have some idea of what is right or wrong so that you can help the other person have some more functional reality structure. Some people think that everyone just has their own way of thinking, which then allows them to support people while partially shielding themselves because they won't take any type of thinking that seriously. but then they won't be able to give the person actual guidance, and the support they give will be very superficial. But if you understand this theory, you can engage very deeply with people while still shielding yourself from being affected by beliefs you don't want to take in. You can validate that it's understandable to have any sort of belief because of the emotional reasons behind it, and then you support or condemn those reasons. For example, if you talk to a person who says life feels meaningless, you can then talk to them about why they feel that way. Most likely, they've had bad experiences with other humans, and then you can validate that those experiences and a lack of better ones would cause life to feel meaningless, yes. But better experiences are possible in the right circumstances. Then you would need to identify why exactly the bad experiences happened before, so that the negative experiences could be allocated into more specific modes instead of life as a whole. That's where it gets more complicated, but if you want to keep it simple, then usually just hearing about the experiences and affirming what treatment was bad or not is helpful, so at least the person won't blame themselves as much for it, even when that's needed. It will help with the allocation, assuming that the person giving the feedback has a clear understanding of reality. If you're not used to relating with people in this sort of way, I recommend proceeding with caution. A lot of things can go wrong, and you should have the safety of your own mind as a priority. This is a subject I will explain more in depth at another time, and you might want to wait to hear that before rushing into anything. So these were the basics I used to get myself better. I would seek out social experiences where I could activate specific modes and strengthen their baselines. I would allocate negative associations into modes that I could keep inactive, and most importantly, I would focus on moving some positive associations into modes that I could keep inactive. And that is a frequently overlooked part of getting better. It's not just the negative things that can happen to you, it's the wrong kinds of things that can end up feeling good to you, and not just in the form of drug use, for example. The wrong kinds of thoughts or the wrong kinds of social experiences can feel good, which can cause damage or deepen the existing damage. Emotional damage isn't just about the suffering, it's about what it can cause to feel good to you. Some people say that if something feels good to you, then it must be your nature, and you should embrace it. There are very few things that feel inherently good to us, so that would not be a valid principle to follow. And even some of the things that do feel inherently good aren't always good to pursue, like drug use. Gaining all this understanding of the inner workings of the mind also allowed me to connect with others in a way I had never considered before, both in how I learned to have it affect me in the most positive way and how positively I could affect the other person. As my anxiety went away, I came to realize that the nerve issues I had in my hands came from anxiety I had before. The nerve issues were caused by constriction at my shoulders, and anxiety had presumably been constricting my entire chest area for years until it caused that issue. When the anxiety went away, it to my surprise removed the nerve issue as well. Without getting into the entire medical history, long story short, things worked out. A lot of you might have questions about many things here. There's a lot more details and nuances left to be said, including a guide with more specific instructions on how you can craft your mind and manage your relationships. But like I've said, those will be for another time. So this will be it for now. There's a lot wrong with the world. There's a lot wrong with what people think of the world, of humanity, of themselves. At the time of making this video, the world is insane. I hope that one day that statement won't apply anymore. I hope that one day someone will watch this video and they'll know that hope was fulfilled. Humans have suffered needlessly because we have lacked understanding of our own nature. Our societies have achieved a lot of great things with our understanding of the world outside, but we have lacked the guiding principles that would come from understanding the world inside. It is as if humanity has become great at building the fastest car possible while having no idea where to go with it. There has been no map. Much of humanity has been gripped by self-hatred, hatred of our real nature, while indulging in the delusion of the controller. Countless people have blamed themselves. They have thought they're deficient for caring about what others have thought of them. They have thought they shouldn't be influenced by others, that they should find this magical self from somewhere inside themselves. They have thought they just need to learn to love themselves, as if that was an action a person would simply do on their own. Many people have thought that they've achieved exactly that, while being blind to how others made it happen for them, or at least that they needed to affect other people to accomplish it. Some people have made the claim that the supposedly logical person won't care how others treat them, that it's irrational, that it's out of control emotions, that it's the ego. Some people have battled what they call the ego while not realizing they're battling themselves. Now, a person can have the wrong consideration. You might overreact or underreact because of emotional damage. You can care about the wrong person. You can have the wrong boundary, the wrong belief, the wrong attachment, the wrong standard, the wrong mode. But the principle of being affected by other humans is not wrong. This is the map. This has been the introduction for the theory of the mechanical mind.